Okay, excellent. Okay, so guys, and gals and everyone there, we are talking today about practical cybersecurity 2020 edition. And that 2020 edition is going to be pretty important here, as we'll see. So first of all, a little bit of introduction for those who don't know. My name is TJ Rowe. I currently work at Idaho Falls Power as the Network and Security Specialist here. I'm actually a local here from Idaho Falls. I've worked in various locations doing IT work, different things, mostly systems administration, network engineering, things like that. In fact, just a little side story on that. It's interesting because, as I mentioned, I'm from here, and it's kind of fun that I will occasionally, when I've been dealing with customers and doing some consultation in the past, I've been asked before more than once, "Where are you from?" Like, "Well, I'm from here," and they're like, no, no one technical comes from Idaho. That doesn't happen. So anyway, I like to set them straight on that. It's like, no, I'm a native, and I'm a computer guy, geekazoid overall. I love this stuff. So anyway, I just thought that'd be kind of be fun. So here's the thing. Originally, back when I came up with the idea for this presentation in earlier in the year, back in January, I wanted to talk about cybersecurity trends. What was happening, what's going on, what's the latest, and we'll definitely be talking about that. But here's the thing: things have changed a little bit in the last year. You may have noticed, and because of that, well, probably don't need to tell you about all these things that's going on. We've got the quarantines, masks, distancing, we're working, school, everything from home, web conferences like this. So because of this, we've all had to kind of rethink how we're doing things, even some of the content, what we're talking about, things like that. Now, there are some advantages to this. First of all, with web conferencing, well, we've got broader audiences. There's a lot more people you can get in doing a lot more things. So I like to, keep that in mind. But comes with the downside of, like I was saying at the start, the opportunity for feedback isn't always as good. It's always a lot easier as a speaker to be in a room physically full of people. You can read, the faces. You can kind of see, all right, I'm getting bored. Rather than just basically talking to a camera, imagining the room full of people. But again, get around that. But the thing is, cybersecurity is as relevant now as ever. In fact, it's more relevant now in a lot of ways. But we've changed with all these things. How we do things has changed. And that's why I wanted to reformulate this presentation. In truth, I actually rebuilt the whole thing over the weekend. No, I really wanted to go in there and rethink what we were doing and really gear this toward practical cybersecurity. Well, all right, why do you care? Why do you guys care? You're going to class today and you're doing your projects and everything. It's like, why do I care what this guy on the TV has to say? It's just a thing I got to listen to. What is this cybersecurity buzzword? Everyone's talking about cybersecurity. And well, let me look it up for you. Let me Google that for you. And then the textbook or the wiki definition, well, cybersecurity is the protection of computer systems and networks from the theft of or damage to their hardware, software, or electronic data, as well as from disruption, misdirection of the services they provide. Okay, that's boring. Less boring. Cybersecurity is about keeping you guys safe, your family safe, your school, the organizations you'll work for safe. It's about safety in a lot of ways. That's all cybersecurity is really about. Cyber just meaning about computers, and of course security. So it is important. It's not just a bunch of boring business guys saying cybersecurity, buzzword, bingo. It is important. Because who's the target? You. You guys are the target. We're all targets. That's the key. And we need to start thinking about that. So, what can the bad guys do? Let's really think about that. Now, I know you guys, you probably have some idea. You're smart. You're working on some intelligent stuff here. So I'm not going to underestimate you. You probably have some good ideas already on what this is. But let's go over it. Let's make sure we're all on the same page. What can they do? Well, First of all, someone gets a hold of your computer, gets a hold of your software, your data. Yeah, they can steal your information. They can steal all the stuff about you. Things that maybe you don't care as public, maybe things that you do care. We're going to talk a little bit about that down the road here. We're going to talk about, how you make those distinctions. But here's the other thing. They can take over your computer, your phone, whatever other devices, and they can just turn around and use it to attack other people. So it looks like you're attacking other people. This is not, theoretical stuff you hear on the news. This is not, textbook stuff. This happens. This happens all the time. It happens in businesses around town. It happens to people you may know. It happens. And then finally, because a lot of these people who do these attacks, a lot of these what we call them malicious actors, they're agents of chaos in some cases. They break your stuff because they can. And if they don't get your information, or they do, and they use your equipment, or they can't, they may break it just because they can. So these are all pretty good reasons, I think, to not want to be compromised, I would say. All right. So what can you do? Again, let's talk about practical stuff. How do I keep my equipment secure? Well, to do that, let's talk about healthcare. No politics, I promise. No, here's the thing. Healthcare, I have found, is a great analogy when talking about cybersecurity. So it's all about mitigating risk. That's the term we use. And I know it's kind of sounds like a real formal business word. You probably heard of risk mitigation. You also hear it in healthcare, but it's real. Here's the thing with healthcare. When I come to you guys and I say, are you healthy? Do you feel healthy? Well, most of you know, yeah, okay, that's a loaded question. What's healthy? I mean, what is being healthy? I mean, we all have these ideas of what it means to be healthy, right? Well, eat right, plenty of exercise, things like this, right? That's healthy, okay. But we all know intuitively that there's a whole bunch of stuff to that. Like that's a big, complicated topic, as we understand. Well, that's absolutely the case with cybersecurity as well. It's very, very similar. And that's interesting. And we may think, well, yeah, of course it is. It is complicated. And I understand that I'm not either 100% safe or, not. So I understand there's a lot of gray area. But you would be surprised. In my years of doing consultation with businesses of all size, I will have, business people come to me, and many of them technical, network people or otherwise IT people, systems admins, and they'll ask the question, okay, I appreciate all you're saying, but I really just need to make my network secure. How do I keep myself safe? How do I be safe? How can I guarantee that I'm secure? And I ask, how can you guarantee you're healthy? How can you guarantee your safety? And then, of course, the realization comes to them. They realize, oh, exactly. It's about risk mitigation. We absolutely can make you more secure. You can be more healthy. You can be more safe. You can be more of all these things, but no one can guarantee anything. And please understand, that doesn't mean I'm not going to be one of these. I don't quite use the term self-interested, but there's a lot of people in this industry who want to, with good intentions in mind, they want to promote cybersecurity awareness, but they also kind of leave you get a paranoid feeling, if that makes sense. And I don't want to leave you with that. Like there are cases where you absolutely can increase your risk mitigation and be a lot more safe. But, it's never going to be 100%. And what you need to do is find your acceptable risk level. And we'll talk about that. So what are your risk factors when we're talking about cybersecurity? Again, very similar to healthcare. What are your risk factors just overall? And guys, I want you to keep this in mind. As I'm standing here talking about cybersecurity, and one of the reasons I reformulated this presentation was because I don't want this just aimed, I don't want you thinking about this just in terms of, okay, this is a business guy who's talking about, talking to other business people, completely, shooting over, hey, we're students, I've got my home computer, I've got my family stuff, I'm going to be working at a job at some point, doing these other things, maybe now in the future, whatever. This doesn't really apply to me. I want you to think about everyone. This applies to everyone. This applies to you guys at home. This applies to you on your phones, on your tablets. It absolutely applies. And that's why I'm talking about these broad concepts first, because it is practical and important. So let's get back to these risk factors. How public are you? Now, because granted, I did say at the start, everyone, is a target. That's true. But of course, obviously, if you're more well-known, if you're a celebrity, if you're a large company, organization, large government organization, of course, you're going to be a bigger target. That's somewhat intuitive, but it is something to consider. And also, how public do you make yourself? That is a risk. Now, it may be an acceptable risk, and we'll talk about acceptable risk as we go on. In fact, we're going to keep repeating the term acceptable risk. But it's something to think about. The more you make yourself public, like I'm doing right now, I'm talking to a public group over the internet. It's not super, we're not celebrities here, but it's something. You are raising your profile. You're raising that just a little more. It's something to think about. What are your assets and how can they be misused? Meaning, what are your electronic gizmos and gadgets? What do you have? What are you using with whatever your public profile is? Do I have just my phone? For example, if my phone and my tablet's the only computing device I have, it's a relatively low profile. I mean, there's not a whole ton that they can use, to get elsewhere. But say you've got a lab full of computers, for example. You're a school or a business. You've got, tens, hundreds, thousands of computers. A lot of assets there. All of those potentially could be, owned, taken under malicious control, and utilized in one way or another, or many ways. Those are all things to consider. That definitely raises your risk profile. And then I love this bottom one. Are you the weakest link in the chain? What do I mean by that? Meaning, because you might be thinking, I'm a student. I've got a couple of devices, family, home computers, whatnot. I'm not that big of a, my risk profile isn't that high. Okay, in a lot of ways that's true. However, this is where a little bit of paranoia, healthy paranoia comes into it. Does that mean because you can kind of do a little bit of this second guessing, because you're low profile, you're the perfect target for someone to take ownership of your stuff to go attack others? Because that actually is a risk factor, believe it or not. Let me give you an actual practical, real example. So I work for Idaho Falls Power, as I mentioned at the start, right? So we're local. Idaho Falls is actually fortunate enough to have its own electric company. We always have. And you'd think we're relatively small, right? I mean, we contribute to Idaho Falls overall municipal power, and we also sell some of that power back to the power grid, and so on and so forth. But as far as the big electric players in the North American power grid, we're relatively small. We're really quite small. So you would think, all right, so you guys aren't that big of targets. What am I even talking about? Are we the weakest link in the chain? Now, obviously, out of self-interest, I hope not. We certainly endeavor not to be. And that is, in fact, something very real that we have to tackle with. We cannot afford to be the weakest link in the chain. Just because we're, the little guys compared to a lot of other large organizations, we can't, because they out there, the bad guys out there are looking for the weakest link. They're looking for the low-hanging fruit. That's one of the most important things to be aware of. So, yeah, being the weakest link in the chain, you want to watch out for that. So, again, back to that, is this level of risk acceptable? I keep asking that for each individual risk factor you have, because it is not a rhetorical question. A lot of times, someone in my field will often ask, well, do you really want to do that? Is that an acceptable risk? And you might think that's, no, you don't want to do that, because no, that's not necessarily what I'm saying at all. We all individually, or as an organization, depending on what the case is, we have to evaluate if a risk is acceptable. For example, what we're doing right now, this conference, there's some slight elevated risks associated with it. Is it acceptable? Well, we're deeming so. We'll get into some specific examples later, but it's something I want you all to think about. So with information, with your information, and I'm talking about, just when you're online, basically on the internet doing anything, just like we're doing right now, I want you to start categorizing in your head, basically all of the knowledge in your brain, everything you know, everything you put out there. And I want you to consider these three categories that we've got. So public is pretty obvious, but let's actually talk about it. So anything that you classify as public, that you're saying, I don't care if this information is out there, it's fine. Think about this. It's out there for the world to see indefinitely. Guys, that's really important because that's something that's kind of crept up on us in the last maybe 20 or so years, really the last 10 years with a lot of social media, that we have not taken into consideration. Many of us have not taken into consideration, meaning you post a YouTube video, you post a Snapchat, you post a whatever on any media, and it's out there, guys, and it's not necessarily going away anytime soon, hence indefinitely. We don't know. I want you to think about this. It seems silly, but you're posting YouTube videos now, or whatever you're posting, Twitch streaming, anything you record. Do you want your grandkids to see that? It's possible. It's not as crazy as it sounds. I just want you to think about that. And you know what? I'm not saying you don't. That's not my choice. That is your guys' call. Or where you're working, or the organization you're with, your school, your place of business. That's whatever the organization is, that's individually their call. But I want you to always be thinking about that, what you're putting out there as public. Private. Okay. So private's is kind of this middle category. It's the type of information that you have that you would rather not get out there. Now, I know the traditional kind of common sense rule has been, well, if it's private, don't put it on the internet. Unfortunately, that just doesn't really work anymore. It doesn't work. That's old school thinking because you've got all these cloud services, you've got Google, you've got iCloud, you've got all these places where you put your stuff. And I'm not going to stand here and try to tell you, you can't put anything online that, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. Businesses know that, government knows that, individuals, we have to know that. So stuff that we categorize as private is the kind of stuff that it wouldn't be absolutely devastating if, say, someone compromised Google or Apple iCloud or something like that. It wouldn't be devastating, but you wouldn't like it. Technically what it would be is it would increase your risk level of future attacks, things like that. So I mean, just as an example, in the networking field, in the field that I'm in here and that you guys are working in right now, or looking at. Network diagrams, network information about our computer systems, whether they be just individual personal systems or business systems and networks, things like that. That's generally considered private. Here's a great example. If I had behind me on this wall, if you could read it with this terrible lighting in here, if I had a big old network diagram of the city's network and I had some, some addresses and things like that, that would be considered private. It's not. I wouldn't be breaking any horrific rules, and it wouldn't bring our network down and crack us wide open if anyone saw it, but we just prefer not. It just raises our risk level of attack a little more. The more information potential attackers have, then the more exposed you are. So it's one of those things. That's generally what we consider private. So for cases like that, it is a judgment call. You have to trust, that's the key, the vendor or parties that you're sharing that information with. In fact, I would consider, it's very relevant to this, I would consider a lot of things that are being shared in these web conferences going on right now around the world that have been, all summer. Most of that's basically more or less private, right? Like this isn't kind of. I mean, that's with the understanding, and we'll get into that, but that's with the understanding that it could be recorded, things like that. But for the most part, it's within a contained community. And so there's that big gray area. Again, I'm not telling you what you should or shouldn't do, but it's something to consider. Think about what's private if you trust the parties that you're sharing this information with. If you do, if it's worth the risk, go for it. But you need to make that decision. Lastly, of course, the other side, no surprise here, secret. So that is the information that, whatever that may be, that if it gets out to anyone outside, whatever your most trusted group is, it would be absolutely devastating, either to you personally, your organization, family, whatever. Most obvious examples, things like that, are passwords, credentials, things like that. Things that anyone out there, an attacker, could definitely use to do all the things we talked about at the start. Get into your stuff, steal your stuff, destroy your stuff, all of that. That's the secret stuff. Now, again, you might think, that's the stuff we don't want online. Well, that'd be nice if we could just say that, but you almost really can't do that anymore either, can you? Example, password managers. Very common, and I'll mention them probably at least once more today. But password managers, you store passwords in them, technically online. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't. I use a password manager. But with that, considering it is secret information, there is an implicit level of trust there. And you basically have to say, okay, I am trusting this vendor, whatever the service is online, to hold my secret information secure. And even then, yes, you do have to consider when you put it out there, it may be possible, however unlikely, that it could be compromised. And if that happens, what does it mean? But again, it's about acceptable risk. Do you accept that risk? If you don't, you're like, nope, I don't want that stuff out there, then that's understandable. But just think about it. So we basically have these three tiers: secret, private, public. And I think it would be very helpful, guys, if you just start categorizing everything in your life every day. You start categorizing your information into those categories. And that will really help as you go down the road, as you're getting into businesses, tech, cybersecurity, networking, anything in the field or outside of the field, just life these days. Start thinking in terms of these categories. And I think it will really help, because as you're, participating in social media, as you're doing whatever, backing things up to the cloud, things like that, your awareness of these risk levels will just kind of start kicking in. It kind of starts to become subconscious. So just something to consider. So let's kind of go over the specific examples. Now that we've talked about this is more where the practical case kicks in. And to be honest, this is the part that's kind of the most interactive that normally I'd love to get questions on, and we have some discussion during the presentation. But because we can't do that right now until the end, we'll hold any questions or thoughts you have till the end, and we'd love to go over them. But let's just cite some specific examples, some things you may have been thinking about in relation to this whole risk assessment and categories and things like that. Let's talk about social media. That's always a big fun one that we like to pick on these days. So what is the risk of social media anyway? And by social media, understand, I know that's a big umbrella. Obviously we're talking, Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, anything basically that's an online service where I'm sharing information to the world, where I'm publishing things. In a certain way, you could easily say that these web conferences are a type of more private social media, essentially. So the big risk is your information being posted. Now, obviously, if it's public and you've deemed it public, no problem at all. But you got to be careful about that secret or personal information getting out there. Because again, once it's out there, it is public. That information that you have previously classified as you didn't want out there is now out there indefinitely. So always be taking that into account. So again, what's the mitigation technique for that? Again, we're talking mitigating that risk. Just be hyper aware of it, guys. I know I'm kind of repeating myself on this, but it bears repeating. And that's true for all of us. I don't want to be the guy who's up here just preaching on the TV to you guys about, social media is bad, don't share it. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying be aware of everything you put out there, because that applies to all of us, all the time. I need to be aware about, what I'm sharing when I'm doing a presentation. We'll get to that. Web conferencing. Oh, look, like what we're doing now. It's got its own category because it's the same sort of risk. In fact, I just repeated the same risk. It's the same thing. And here I say, be aware that though reasonable privacy is expected, it isn't a guarantee. Now, I know that's a very qualitative term, reasonable privacy, but I think it's a fair term to use because it's about, again, some layer of trust between you and the vendor hosting the web conference, whether it's Zoom or what have you, any of them. But it's also about, between you and everyone else in the conference as well. For example, take this very one. So we're relatively a private group. I mean, we'll probably be seen by, us and then whoever the video is shared with. But there's that hidden danger. Recording. So almost everything can be recorded, and we need to think about these web conferences that we participate in. Anyone can be recording it and could do anything with it. It's something to think about. So again, a practical example I kind of referred to earlier. If I had some big network diagram up on the wall behind me, that could potentially be some private information leaking out. Hopefully I wouldn't be irresponsible enough to have a big old password list here that I show you on the screen, but that's an example of secret information, things like that. So something else to consider. Now, I don't know about you, but how often have you seen a web conference where someone's sharing the screen, exactly like what I'm doing now with the presentation, and or they're doing a class or anything like that, and they basically share their whole screen? But it actually is pretty common, maybe even the most common, and then they take whatever the presentation is full screen, and it's fine. So they've just basically shown you, and whoever else in the world may be watching, recorded or otherwise, their desktop. Now, as long as you deem that to be basically public information, that's no problem. And maybe it is no problem. But think about that. You know how many times I've seen a presenter or someone teaching a fairly high-level technical class. They share their screen, and it's usually, okay, it's a Windows or a Mac desktop and all this. And instantly, anyone who's technical goes, oh, okay, I see all the programs you're running. Oh, look, there are all your web browser links. Okay, yep, this is everything you run. Oh, those must be all the applications you use in your business. Okay. Again, if that's an acceptable risk, fine. But it actually could potentially be a little more information than you would have otherwise preferred to share. For example, there may be some applications there that someone uses in their day-to-day business in their workplace that if it gets out that those applications are being used, a potential attacker could see that and go, they're using this application. I've got an exploit for that application. I can use that. Just something to consider. I know that sounds like I'm going up the paranoia alley, but you want to think about it when you share things. That's why, for example, even in my case, I mean, it wouldn't be the end of the world if I shared my desktop with you guys. It'd just be, look, here's your dock full of applications. But again, it's something to think about. That's why I share just the relevant tab for that exact reason. Okay, so that's just, again, something to consider with that. Now, passwords. And I know you guys get tired of hearing about passwords because we've been hearing about passwords for over 20 years, 30 plus years, actually. We've been dealing with passwords for a long time, and it's still a thing. I wish it weren't. I'm sorry that it is. It is. And we're still trying to get away from them, but they're still an important aspect of security. So what really is the risk with passwords? Well, obviously, weak ones, ones that are too short to anything. And trust me, I could give have given a whole presentation on just passwords before, but yeah. But having too short actually is a problem. Also, having too many that you're trying to remember is a problem. And that's actually unbelievably common. And I work on that, every day with my coworkers, and I'm sure you guys are well aware of it as well. We all have so many passwords now that we deal with all these different websites and services, things like that. And having too many to remember kind of forces us to do what? Make them simpler, make them much more easy to guess, things like that. Happens all the time. And technical people are not immune to it either. Happens all the time. So it's just something to take into account. So how do we mitigate that risk? Well, a couple of ways, actually really 3 big ways. One, develop a password system. What do I mean by that? Develop a formula. You may not be able to get around having a lot of different passwords, but come up with a formula that works for you. Try to employ, the different methods that I'm sure we've all heard before about how to make good passwords. Employ those methods, those complexity methods into it, but come up with a system, just as an example, all of my passwords are going to have, the word password with a 0 in it, but then I'm going to, at the start, have some other letter or number or maybe a special character, and at the end they'll have another special character, or something like that. Just come up with a little formula that you use. You can still have a great secure password, and if you have a formula, you can do all kinds of things. You can use a different password for every website you go to and still remember it, because maybe you put the name of the website somewhere in your password, something like that. Just have a system. That helps. Now, something on top or kind of alongside that is to use a password manager. So password managers are basically, as I've referred to before, and maybe you're already well familiar with them, but LastPass is one, Dashlane, 1Password. These are all great password managers. They basically store most of them store your password in an encrypted vault on their systems. Yes, on the internet. So that kind of gets back to, you are accepting a certain level of risk having those secret passwords in there. You have to trust that vendor. And of course, they do everything they can to earn your trust. And it's not up to me to tell you whether you should trust them or not. That's something where you need to do your research, educate yourself on it, find out if you trust that vendor. But it's just an example. And actually, guys, by the way, this is a case in practical security as we go. I kind of noticed it halfway through the presentation. I figured, we're talking a little bit about information disclosure, and I had intended to actually make this nice and full screen for the presentation, but I didn't. And so basically, we've got this, but you probably get a little of my address bar here as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, this is where feedback would be nice, but this is actually a great example because it gives you information about me that, not a big deal, wouldn't even call it private, it's pretty public, but it actually discloses some interesting things. Like, let's look at it. Again, I'm assuming that that's what you can see here in this. So, oh, look at that, that's LastPass. It means I use LastPass, that's my password manager. So I have just disclosed to you what my password manager of choice is, this LastPass. This is not an advertisement, but I really like LastPass. No, but just as an example, and oh, look, here are some bookmarks and things like that. Again, not that interesting. Just, it's an example of how easy it is, folks, to just share things, without even intending to. So just something to keep in mind. So again, whether or not you need to use a password manager, maybe you don't have all that many passwords, and maybe you don't need to store them all in an online vault. Oh, by the way, another nice function that these password managers have is they allow you to auto-generate passwords. So in reality, a lot of the passwords that we store in password managers, you would never remember. They're like 100 characters long with random characters. They're great passwords. They're almost unbreakable passwords, but they're stored in these vaults. So again, it's just something to consider. I do tend to recommend them when you have a lot of online passwords. But you'll still need a password system because there are always going to be passwords you do not want to put in a password manager. Certain passwords. Usually they're things like your work login, personal email login, things like that. Those are actually certain accounts that are too important to have in a password manager. You just need to remember them. Just something to consider. Now, this last one, I promise, because I don't want to run way over time, but two-factor authentication is truly a topic in and of itself. It really is. And I would love to delve into it. Maybe you guys have some questions about it. But in short, two-factor authentication basically works like this. The theory of authentication is that in order to prove you are who you say you are, you have to have either something you know, something you have, or something you are. Now, what that means is something you know is obviously like a password or a passphrase. That's something you know that is in your head, that sort of thing. Something that you have means a physical token, your phone, something like that. That's something you have, a token, something. And then something you are. Well, that's just a loose way of saying some physical, some characteristic, biosignatures, things like that, thumbprints, retina scan, things like that. Those are DNA, those are things you are. So anyway, two-factor or multi-factor authentication are just methods where wherever you're authenticating requires any two of those things. Usually, most commonly, it's something you know and something you have. So it's like a password and then some sort of token. Some use biometrics, so it's something you are or a physical characteristic and then a token or a password. But it basically combines two of those things. It's really cool. In fact, it's the way things are going. More and more websites and things like that are supporting it, and some will even start requiring it. For example, Apple is actually requiring it now on a lot of their devices. In fact, it's being turned on automatically. It's great. However, it is a huge double-edged sword. And I'd really love to delve into this one. But the key with this, the more secure you make things, sometimes the easier it is to lose it, to lose your own access. And that's one of the dangers with two-factor authentication. Consider that, okay, you've got your password and you've got your little two-factor authentication code that pops up on your phone. Well, that's great. But what happens if you lose your phone or you lose the app? You could possibly, if you haven't taken the right precautions to follow recommended backup procedures for your two-factor codes, you could lock yourself permanently out of whatever that account is, permanently. And that company will not help you because that would violate their security policy. Because people have taken advantage of things like that before. They've taken advantage of people trying to recover their codes, or supposedly the owners of accounts trying to recover their codes. This happened to Apple before. It's happened to a few other major vendors before. So in order to prevent that, there's just they have a policy. If you use two-factor authentication, they cannot help you recover your account if you lose access. End of story. That's why it's a double-edged sword. You have to be very careful about two-factor authentication. So while I'd love to say everyone should research it, everyone should use it as much as you can, you want to be careful with it. But it is something that's becoming increasingly more common. I'd kind of like to make you aware of it. Okay, malware, ransomware. So this is a big risk, obviously. We run into it all the time. Again, it's a topic we could really go into and talk about at great length. But obviously, it can cause all kinds of problems, from information disclosure to someone taking over control of your system to breaking it, like we talked about. It can basically do all the things that we talked at the start that, a malicious actor could do. So how do you mitigate that? Well, believe it or not, I'm not going to jump right on what seems like the most obvious run. Run an antivirus. Actually, I hesitate to even recommend that one, to be honest with you. Instead, I take more of a holistic approach. I would very much like every user, whether you work in a technical field or not, to just be more aware of what is running on your computer, of what your computer is doing. This is very much like driving a car, operating any kind of vehicle. When you operate a vehicle, boat, car, jet ski, anything, generally the expectation is you know what all the controls do. You kind of know where everything is, and you generally know how it should work. Right? I mean, that's just generally that's a good practice. You kind of should just have a good feel. Doesn't mean you have to be a mechanic. Doesn't mean you have to be an expert on cars. I'm not an expert on cars at all. I take my car to the dealer to get my oil changed. Yeah, I'm not an expert. I don't like dealing with cars. But I certainly know what all the instrumentation on my panel is. I know what all the controls and knobs and doohickeys in my car, I know what they do. And I think that's a reasonable ask. And I think most of us, yeah, of course, that's reasonable. Isn't that pretty reasonable for our computer desktops as well, for our phones, for our gizmos and devices? Just be aware. You don't have to know about everything under the hood. But if you're aware of kind of everything that should be there, how things normally operate, you're now going to know when something's amiss. You're just going to be able to get that feeling. And that's actually one of the biggest lines of defense, is just knowing. I remember back in the day when I worked at a local provider, we did service for people's computers, home computers. And this is a familiar story to some, but it's not uncommon. We would run across these desktops. The desktop was just a blanket of icons. The little notification tray on Windows in the lower right corner was just like icons all the way, status icons of whatever junkware all the way across the screen. It's fun to poke fun at stuff like this. But the point is, do you think those users had any idea what was running on their computer? No, they didn't. And that is a real risk factor. Just be aware generally about the health of your machine. And ultimately, it boils down to just run software that you trust. I mean, it really is basically that simple. Is when you're running software, when you're running a program on your phone, tablet, computer, anything, you are implicitly, by doing so, trusting the writer, the author, the vendor of that software to basically take control of your machine. That's basically what's going on every time we run an application. I'm running Zoom right now, right? We're all running it. We are trusting this company to basically share your screen, to take some level of ownership of your machine. I'm not saying that's bad. It's just something to be aware of. And then notice, oh yeah, consider endpoint security software like antiviruses. Enough said. No, it's just, that software is fine, and most businesses run some sort of, we now call it endpoint security software instead of just antiviruses. It's reasonable. A lot of businesses, schools, organizations will run it. Honestly, most home users, Windows built into Windows Defender that comes with Windows is usually actually sufficient. If you follow this other advice, it is sufficient in almost all cases. I do not recommend necessarily going out and getting older, last gen Norton antivirus, whatever, not to pick on one in particular, just as an example, just going out and getting it just for the sake of, say, I have this software installed, now I'm secure. No, do these other things first, and then maybe as a last step, have some sort of endpoint security, antivirus software, something like that. And really the last one, maybe even one of the most important ones, is keep your stuff up to date, keep it current. Now, thankfully with really most new stuff, this is done for you automatically. So that's why it's the last item. It is really important, but most stuff, most operating systems, certainly your phones, things like that, are doing it automatically. And when it prompts you to install an update, most of the time, yes, absolutely. I mean, unless you're right in the middle of something, go for it. You want those updates. Obviously, sometimes updates can bring problems. That's absolutely true, but it is much better in general. The current attitude of the IT industry as a whole is to move forward with updates. Yes, you kind of want some caution in large environments where you're deploying 10,000 computers, a new update. But generally speaking, the more current things are, the better. And Microsoft agrees with that, by the way. That's why the Windows release cycle has now shortened substantially. What was, years, like 6-7 years between operating system releases to basically 6 months between major feature releases, with like a year or a year and a half of support for some of those releases between then. Things are getting crazy fast with that. So it's just something to keep in mind. Okay, I know we're running a little short on time here, so I'm going to try to crunch this together. Hopefully we'll have some time for questions for you at the end. I don't want to keep you guys later than you want to be, but I really want to talk about this one, and I really want to preach on this one for a minute. Data loss. You can lose your data through a malicious actor, sure, or through accident, hardware failure, whatever. You guys are aware. You're tech people. You understand that how data can be lost. I cannot stress enough. I cannot do it because I run into this still sometimes daily among business professionals, sometimes even tech professionals. Do back up your data. Please do it. Here's the thing, and this is a little saying, we have a fun little thing in the IT industry. No backups means your data is temporary. Remember that. If you don't have, whatever your data is, I know that's a big umbrella term. I keep saying data, files, whatever. You guys know, what your information is. Wherever they are, if they're not backed up, consider them just temporary, because someday whatever they're on is going to go away, going to fail, something's going to happen. So consider it temporary. Okay, so you do back it up. Let's say whatever. Say it's in the cloud. Say you download a copy, or say you download a copy, so you upload it to the cloud. You've got a backup. Great. It's unimportant then, because what happens if your backup fails? I mean, the old school, the one that goes back like 30 plus years is, I backed up to floppy and the floppy failed. That's the old example. But it's true of anything now. I've got a Mac and I use Time Machine to back up all my files. Great. What if the disk port fails? What if the backup gets corrupted? Or whatever, Windows backup, businesses using any number of backup tools. What if your backup fails and gets corrupted? Then what? So the rule is 2 backups, at least, for anything that you consider important. And generally, that means 2 different ways of backing up. And guys, it's not as hard as it seems. Really, it isn't. For example, you got some really important files. Back them up to the cloud somewhere, doesn't matter, your choice. Whatever service you like, OneDrive, iCloud, Google Drive, doesn't matter. Just have that out there, have it somewhere. Have it out there, again, we're talking about risk, if it's not too big of a personal risk for you to put it out there. Or take those files, copy them to some media, USB drive, other drive, hard drive, other computer, whatever. Great, there's your second copy. It can be that simple, it can be that simple. Just keep that in mind. 2 copies for backups, for important data. All right, let's wrap it up. So, just don't be the weakest link, Take a lot of this stuff into account, categorize, your information, categorize your levels of information security, assess your risks, and don't be as weak as, the other guy, which again, none of us wants to be the other person, but just do that, because that is who they're targeting. They're targeting the lowest hanging fruit. Whether you're a large organization or an individual, don't be that person. This middle one, just don't get bogged down in hype words like cybersecurity, buzzwords, or people trying to sell you fear and paranoia. Notice I didn't say, guys, always be watching your don't be afraid, be very afraid. No, not at all, not at all. Just rationally assess risks and determine what risk levels work for you in every situation. By even thinking about it, you are increasing your own security. So remember to educate yourself, ask questions, look things up, Google them, things like that. Know your risks, take reasonable action to mitigate those risks to what you guys deem an acceptable level. So now we're ready to open it up to questions. If you want, you can turn the mic on, or however we want to communicate anything. If there is anything, feel free. Let's go for it. Here, I'll go ahead and stop the sharing here. All right. I know you're all muted right now. Does anyone can anyone open it up, or what have we got? We got any feedback, any questions?
Okay, I have a question from a student.
Absolutely.
They want to know what might be one of the big fears, cyber fears that City of Idaho Falls has, or you in your position have.
That is an awesome question. So we have a fair number. The City of Idaho Falls has a number of areas that can be targeted. For example, the electric department by itself, which is actually the area where I specialize, although the whole city has, there are a number of targets there. But for example, for just the electric department, one of the big things, and kind of one of the things I talked about near the start, was we're not a huge electric company compared to the overall. We're not a big part of the power grid. Well, you'd think that's something we wouldn't have to worry about, right? Actually, that's not true at all. In fact, the INL, who we do a lot of work with, I'm sure you guys are well familiar with, we have a consultant frequently come in and who works with us, and we do have a lot of those discussions, and we've gone to a lot of classes and cross-training with INL personnel. And as a whole, we have been collectively told by the INL and all their security resources, and their security resources are actually fairly vast. We've been told, you guys, meaning Idaho Falls Power and City of Idaho Falls, you guys are being targeted. We guarantee it. We can't tell you who and why or what, but we can tell you why. Why is that? A couple of reasons, but one of the things, of course, INL has their own self-interests as well, which is understandable. We supply power for some of their facilities. If something really nasty were to happen to our systems and actually affect the power grid, then that could cause a problem for them. So for that reason alone, we are potentially a target. And also because we are a relatively small member of the power grid, which one of the things I kind of glossed over there, so let me just go back and more specifically address, because I keep talking about cybersecurity and power grid. How are they connected? Well, that's the thing. They are connected. It's called what we call SCADA, supervisory control and data acquisition. Basically, they're the computer systems that are interconnected that control things like our power plants, the dams, the actual parts of the electrical grid are substations that control the distribution of power throughout the city. Those are all computer controlled. Now, those are not systems that you'll find out there on the internet. Obviously, I would hope, right? But that is an example of the type of cybersecurity that we have to protect ourselves against. A malicious actor, possibly what we call a state actor, meaning another country with vast resources that other countries may have, potentially of doing the long game with us, meaning scouting maybe for years, looking for something and seeing if they can find a hole, get in, bring us down, use us as an example to the rest of the country and the world. And that kind of thing does happen. That's not paranoia. That's happened in Ukraine. That's happened in other places. That is a serious, that's a serious threat. And then just briefly to wrap that question up, as far as the overall city of Idaho Falls, there are other things. We have billing information, Corey. We have resident information, things like that, that again, that's some of it private, some of it fairly secret. The information that you would do significant damage, and we would get sued over. It would be bad if some of that information gets out. So we have to protect a lot of that information, things like that. Even though, on the other hand, a lot of the information about that we use internally has to be somewhat public because we are a public entity. So we have to walk that balance between, there are certain things that can be made public. You can get, there's all kinds of requests that you can make, and we have to disclose that because we're a public entity. But certain private, individual information, we also have to keep. So yeah, it's walking that tightrope. Does that kind of answer the questions? I know it's hard to comprehensively say, all of the threats that we have to look for, but there are a fair few of them, yes.
Yeah, I think that answered the question.
Awesome.
We're almost out of time for our day, so we might be checking out here in just a second.
Oh, okay. No problem. No problem. Well, I hope that kind of helps you guys. And like I said, any other questions or anything before you guys are wrapping up?
Thanks, TJ.
No, you're good? Okay. All right. Hey, no problem. No problem.
Hey TJ, thank you so much. We appreciate you. You guys, TJ volunteered his time. He's a super busy guy, but he has a huge interest in helping to educate students and identify pathways into IT, cybersecurity, and the whole gamut. So I just want to make sure that we thank him for his time.
No problem. No problem.